Now let's talk about Israelis. Who are Israelis? Stop reading. No, I'm just kidding. You can read. Who are Israelis? In 1921, that 1921 right there, that's the important date. But it builds up. The world shuts its doors. Millions and millions of Jews are flowing westward. Nobody wants them. But they're not stopping. It's, by the way, not just Jews. There's a bill passed in Congress, a law passed by Congress right just in those years against Chinese immigration. The Chinese are coming over to work. And that real, I mean, there's anti-Japanese sentiment, there's anti-Irish sentiment, there's anti-Italian sentiment. But the Jews are the most urgent. The Jews are the group that Congress meets to talk about most fervently, yes?
Are these acts in the US?
So the top one is Britain, the next three are America. In 1921, partly because they had just had this massive wave because of the Russian Civil War where, 150, 200,000 Jews were killed. Probably 150,000 Jews are killed. In 1921 alone, 110,000 people landed in New York Harbor. And they passed the Emergency Quota Act. The Emergency Quota Act takes the major countries that the Jews are coming from and pegs their allowed quotas to 3% of the 1910 census. And it cuts Jewish immigration from 110,000 in 1921 to 1924, 10,000. It cuts it by 90%. And then in 1924, they passed the full Quota Act, the Permanent Quota Act, and then they peg it to 2%. That's a 33% drop of the 1890 census. That's 2 million less Jews. Everybody with me? And then it drops by 1934, when the Nazis are already in power in Germany, to 2,700. America closes its doors to the Jews. America closes its doors to the Jews not because Europe is getting better. It closes its doors to the Jews even as Europe is getting worse. Even as Jews can't go to college in Romania, even as the Poles in 1938 begin stripping citizenship away from Jews who aren't on Polish territory and leaving them stateless. Europe gets worse, and America closes its doors. And after America, each one with a different process, with a different time frame, all of it accelerates during the Great Depression, when there's a lot of worry about jobs being taken by immigrants, when jobs are very scarce. Canada, Australia, Brazil, Argentina, you name it, Jews can't get there anymore. And as the world closes its doors, this happens. I want you to see this carefully. You see this 37? That's the number of years that this column represents. Aliyah is immigration to the land of Israel. Immigration first to Ottoman Palestine, then British Palestine. What happens when the West closes its doors? In the 40 years when 2.5 million Jews land in America, 50,000 ever make it to Israel. 2%? I went into the humanities because I'm bad at math, but I think that's 2%. In 37 years, this hits about 60,000, probably about 90,000 came, 40,000 left. It's complicated, hard to quite follow. 50,000 is sort of the agreed upon consensus, or the median of the consensus of scholars. This is 37 years, 60,000 immigrants. And then 29 years, 400 and something thousand. 1919 to 1948 is the beginning of the major immigration. Because from 1919 to 1948, the Jews have nowhere to go. And they're still desperate to get out. And many of them don't want to go there, because it's not a great place to go. The economy is small. There aren't a lot of jobs. They're still draining swamps or something. It's not. Anybody here ever think about making Aliyah and you're like, I don't know if I can handle the bureaucracy? Imagine 1923. Folks, 1935 alone, what we call the fifth Aliyah, 65,000 Jews in 1 year. 50,000 in 37 years, 65,000 in 1 year. By the way, every single one spoke German in 1935. 1948, Israel is founded. And then in 4 years, 650,000. What is this? What is this graph? What happened? Who are Israelis? Yeah.
Those who were betrayed by the West and Americans specifically.
Welcome to Israel. Where are the other Jews? Where are the Jews who didn't get rescued by the West, who didn't get into America, who didn't get to sit in New York and worry about the Holocaust? Where are the Jews who went through it? You've heard about the Holocaust, so I'm just going to skip, okay? I want to talk about the after the Holocaust. World War II ends, and millions upon millions of people. There are estimates of 9 million, there are estimates of 17 million. I happen to like a book that claimed 15 million, so I'm going to go with that number. Millions upon millions of people are displaced. They're not in their homes. They end the war, they're prisoners of war, they're forced laborers, they fled into forests. Millions and millions of people. And they start going home. And by the end of 1945, there are 1 million people who are officially defined as DPs, displaced persons. They are in camps established for them in Germany, in Austria, a little bit in Italy. And these camps are run by the Allies, the Americans and the British. Of the million, 750,000 are non-Jews. There are two main groups. The first group is Nazi collaborators who can't go home because the Nazis have fallen and they'll be killed. Especially, for example, in the Baltic states, where there were a lot of Nazi collaborators and the Soviets are now in charge and they're purging those countries. That's probably a good 300,000 of them are Nazi collaborators who would be killed if they went home. The second group is various other problems. In other words, Catholics from Poland, there's now basically a civil war on in Poland after the war, and it's just literally dangerous, and so they don't want to go home. And then there are the 250,000 Jews. A lot of Jews try to go home. We have records of Jews trying to go home to Vilna. They left messages on message boards at the synagogue, and then they kept moving. There were pogroms in Poland with people marching in the streets, telling the Jews who had just returned, "You're not welcome here. We were rid of you. Please go." And the Jews flee. And so there are 250,000 displaced people, and to displace Jews, and to settle them, to find a solution for them, to find a country for them. The Americans and the British established something called the International Refugee Organization, the IRO. The IRO goes to governments and says to them, hey, you're missing some workers. A lot of men died in the war. A lot of the economies that want to get back on their feet need working hands. Why don't you come and take these amazing workers who are desperate for jobs and desperate for passports? And about 40 governments come to the camps. And they go to the camps and they meet these displaced persons. And they hire them, and they take them in, and they give them passports, and they naturalize them, and they find them new homes. Every last pro-Nazi collaborator is taken within months. They tend to be well-fed. They tend to have gotten through the war healthy. They tend to be Protestant. They tend to be blonde. They tend to be Lithuanian and Estonian. Sorry to get specific. And every last one is taken. And then the next wave takes, what are you going to do? You're left with the Polish Catholics. Every last one is taken. And then they wrap up and go home. And all the Jews remain. If you end 1946 in a DP camp, you're a Jew who knows that you are literally unwanted just for work by anyone on earth. Truman in desperation in 45, asks Congress to lift the quotas. The quotas are still in place. America knows everything about Auschwitz, and the quotas are still in place. Congress refuses. Truman sends a guy named Earl Harrison. He's the dean of the University of Pennsylvania Law School. Oh, I already said that. In 1946, these are the immigration quotas. That's, by the way, how you do Jewish immigration, because there's no category Jew in American law. So you do by country of origin, and this way you keep them out. That's total from those countries. The Harrison Report. That's the first page of the Harrison Report. Earl Harrison goes to the camps, and he meets the Jews, and he writes a report. Among the things he says in the report, the Nazi guards, we stopped the extermination. That's a big deal, not a small thing. But you know, they're still living in Dachau and Buchenwald and Bergen-Belsen. They're still living in those areas, in those camps. And yes, they have food. And you know what? They've opened 70 newspapers. Not by 1945, but by 1946. And soccer leagues. But they're still living in the camps without citizenship and without being allowed to go anywhere. And the Nazi guards, Harrison says, are replaced by RGIs, holding them in. That's Harrison's report to Truman. He goes to one camp and he gives a survey. And in the survey, he wants to find out where the Jews want to go. So he says, please list the top 5 places you want to go in the world. Not because he can send them there, but because it's good information to know when you're starting to negotiate. And in this particular place, 90% write Palestine on the first line. And then 90% write Palestine on the second line. And Harrison gets very annoyed, and he says, Jews are bad at surveys. And so he gives them another survey. And in that second survey, he says, except for Palestine, where would you go? And 20% write crematorium. What have the Jews of the DP camps understood?
They're not welcome anywhere else.
No, they never will be welcome anywhere else.
Folks, it's over. We get it. It took you a lot of explaining, dear world, but we understood. We are clear. You don't have to explain to us again this one great thing that the world has told us. And all of that is to say that what Israelis are refugees, literal refugees. Palestinians don't know this about us. They kind of have a vague sense of our history, just like you kind of have a vague sense of your history, just like everybody kind of has a vague sense of their history 100 years ago. But they don't understand the extent to which Zionism is not an ideological movement. If you're a Zionist, please don't throw me out of the room. Hear me out a second. It's not nationalism. It is refuge. One of the reasons Palestinians don't know this about us is that we don't say it about ourselves. What do we claim happened? How do we claim Jews came here? Kam am ve'etchil lechet. A nation stood up or awoke and started to walk. We finally awoke to our true identity, and because of our great ideological connection to the land, which had always been there, it had always been there. We finally redeemed ourselves out of sheer willpower. I wish history could work that way. History doesn't work that way. Who are the Jews of Israel? They are the last desperate, decimated remnants of the Jewish communities of 60 countries. And I'll tell you a secret, don't tell anyone outside this room, except for whoever watches this on video. You can tell them. That's Zionism. It's okay that we're refugees, that we're rescue, that it's a project of rescue and not a national movement, because it's a deep project of rescue. That's Herzl. Herzl is that. Herzl is Zionism as rescue. Zionism is not a national movement, it's something bigger. And I'm going to try and say what it is, on one leg, as the Talmud says. What is Zionism, in fact, in truth? You ready? This is it. This is the secret of Zionism. If the non-Jews are watching, I hope they're not taking notes. All right, here we go. Zionism is a sociological analysis of modernity. Zionism says, obviously I'm paraphrasing and simplifying cartoonishly, I apologize. Zionism says the world is changing in the 19th century, profoundly. Industrialization, urbanization, people are living differently. At the beginning of the 19th century, you were living on a small farm in Bavaria with in a village of 150 people you know. By the end of the 19th century, or even by the middle of the 19th century, you are living as an ant in the world's first apartment building in the heart of industrializing Frankfurt, with a single bathroom at the end of the hall for 25 families. That experience that people literally went through, that jarring, society-shattering, family-shattering, economy-changing, identity-shattering experience of industrialization, which, by the way, created communism, created the theory and the response and the social movements. That is changing how people think of themselves and their identities. People are organizing themselves out of small identities, maybe religious identities, and into new kinds of what scholars sometimes call mass societies. What's a mass society? I'm going to throw at you a jumble of words. Don't worry about it. Look them up on Wikipedia if they're exciting. Mass societies are societies of people you don't know, but you're part of. What is a German? I used to come from this village in Bavaria. I used to know what I am. I'm this guy from there. I used to have my own separate little accent. What's a German? Who are the Germans? I haven't met the Germans. Have you met the Germans? Not a German, the Germans. The Germans are an imagined national community. Imagine doesn't mean they don't exist. Imagine means they exist profoundly in our heads, right? Like armies don't actually exist. They are an agreement of a bunch of people to behave a certain way. Like money doesn't actually exist. It's an agreement of a bunch of people to behave. Everybody with me? These new mass societies are not interpersonal. They are imagined. They are huge. And they develop ideologies of nationalism in the 19th century that try and argue that they are deeply and profoundly not only real, but also organic, biological. Tribe. And in this world of new mass societies, in this shift from small agrarian, maybe religious identities to mass national identities of people I don't know, they develop these ideologies of nationalism that try and police the boundaries of these identities to firm them up and make sure that they stay strong. Everybody with me, or has this gotten really boring? Okay, here's Herzl's argument. You ready? This is why he's Herzl. It's not just Herzl, but let's just pin all of it on Herzl for the moment. We think, we Europeans in the late 19th century, that these new nationalisms are building up into a new liberal world. There are parliaments in more places than there were before. There's science in more ways than there ever has been before. People are figuring out subatomic particles. That's new. That's cool. We think we're in this age of progress and liberalism and rights and the expansion of the Jewish experience. What's the Jewish experience of emancipation? It's that I can leave the ghettoized existence of the East and I can move to Berlin and I can become part, Moses Mendelssohn, part of the intellectual elites of Berlin. I can live Albert Einstein's life, at least the first part of his life. Right? This new liberalism is a good thing. We're good. We found the solution to the Jewish problem. And what does Herzl say? What does Herzl say, guys?
Herzl thought that establishing a Jewish state would give dignity to the Jew and also would enable Jews to assimilate in the diaspora because present anti-Semitism would be gone forever.
But why can't they just assimilate without a Jewish state? What's the problem with this new mass society? Yeah.
They just, like, you'll never stop being a Jew to them, so you can't be German.
Folks, take time at some point in your life to read Mein Kampf, to read the Nazis on the Jews. It's the most extreme version of this problem, but it's so clear at the extreme. What's the Nazi problem with the Jews? Yeah.
They're racially different.
That's not the Nazi problem with the Jews. That's the Nazi problem with everybody. Right? The Nazis thought blacks and Japanese were inferior to them. But they weren't genocidally. We could enslave the Slavs. We don't have to murder every last Slav. Why do you have to murder every last Jew? Yeah.
Jews are like seen as these like despised. They have no nation. They have no real identity.
Sort of. It's even more than that. The Jews are more dangerous than that. Yes?
They were afraid of the Jews.
Why? How could you be afraid of the Jews?
They were so successful and like powerful and like strong in community.
Okay, the Jews did something even more dangerous than that.
Their own, to some degree, sovereignty. They were separate from everyone else. It wasn't like the other communities within a specific country where everyone was part of the country. They lived somewhat to some degree separate.
Which creates otherness. And folks, the Nazi fear of the Jews was that the Jews were a threat to Germanness. If Germanness is tribal and blood and ancient and biological, and we can measure it by testing your skull, and a Jew in the morning can be a German, and in the evening a Jew. If Albert Einstein could be the greatest scientist of the German world, and then take a boat to Jerusalem to found Hebrew University because he's a Jew, what is he doing? I am arguing that the boundaries of Germanness are hard. The membrane is impermeable. It is biology. It is real. And what is the Jew doing? He's popping in and out all the time. He's perforating the membrane of Germanness. If a Jew could be a German and something else, if you can have layers, you can't have absolute identity. And if you can't have absolute identity, what is the German? The Jews endanger Germanness. Blacks don't do that. Southeast Asians don't do that. And so the Jews have to actually be destroyed. Herzl doesn't imagine the Holocaust, but he does imagine catastrophe. This is from his diaries. It's in, by the way, a fundraising meeting with the Rothschilds. Okay, so fundraising meetings always go slightly differently from regular conversation, but still. He says to them, they're going to come for us. There's going to be a catastrophe. The catastrophe is the word he uses. That's his word. Will it be a revolutionary expropriation from below? Who's he talking about? Communists. Or a reactionary confiscation from above. Will they chase us away? Will they kill us? I have a fair idea. It will take all these forms and others. This new liberal modernizing Europe cannot contain us. By the way, not just us. It can't contain any minorities. It's not a theory of Jews. It's a theory of modernization. And therefore, the only option we have is to get out. And therefore, it's worth considering. He didn't want it, but it's worth considering Uganda, by which he actually meant a part of Kenya today. But that's not the point. Why? Because we have to get the Jews out. A catastrophe is coming. Yeah?
Is he worried about the Germans or the world in general?
Everybody. Those DPs, those shattered remnants of a European Jewish civilization, the person who wrote this most beautifully is Dr. Dara Horn. She just had this amazing piece about how we remember how Americans remember World War II. Because the American memory of World War II, which was given to you in your schooling is not the Jewish memory of World War II. Because the Nazis lost World War II, but they won the Holocaust. They won the war on the Jews. The Jews were destroyed. And those DPs that the world still, knowing everything there is to know about Auschwitz, didn't want, month after month, year after year, even as their governments plucked out every single Nazi collaborator and every single Catholic and every single Pole and Protestant and Ukrainian, those DPs were 1/4 of the IDF in 1948. What were they fighting for? What did they understand? I don't like ideologies and I don't like elites, because they tend to usually be talking about themselves instead of talking about substance. But go to the ordinary experience of ordinary people. Go to 250,000 DPs who finally land in Israel. When do the DP camps empty out? When do the DP camps finally empty out? That wasn't a rhetorical question. 1948, May. When does Congress update the quotas? June. Exactly. When 2/3 of the DPs are already gone to Israel, then Congress is, in that month, then Congress is willing to consider taking some in. And by the way, the numbers are still very low. I can. Folks, welcome to Israel. Who are we? Who are we? Immediately after 48, the same thing that happened to Europe happened in the Arab world. Not the Holocaust, because now there was somewhere to go. Immediately after 1948, hundreds of thousands of Jews flee the Arab world. Baghdad is almost 25% Jewish in 1930. New York City is about 12% Jewish. And it's Jewish. Imagine how Jewish Baghdad must have felt. In 1952, Baghdad was basically 0% Jewish. Who are we? We are the refugees. We are the Jews who went through history. We are the remnants. How did we respond to that history? You responded to American liberalism's promise coming true by becoming the most liberal people to have ever existed, probably. Maybe college campuses now are beating you a little, I don't know. Depends what liberal means. Not that, I agree. You're still liberal, they're not. Who are we? How do we respond to the 20th century? Hamas thinks that it's going to massacre our children and we're going to run away. And I've had a lot of conversations with Palestinians, and I've written a lot of pieces that were translated into Arabic, for what it's worth, about how we don't know how to run away. You can't get rid of us the way the Algerians terrorized the French out of Algeria. Why?
Nowhere else to go.
Nowhere else to go is the thing everybody's learning to say now. But I don't just mean we don't have somewhere to go. All we are, what it is to be us, is to be the Jew with nowhere else to go. Hamas committed 24 Kishinevs on October 7th. And what happened to the Jews? Everything got simple. Everything got clear. Everybody unified. Everything else quieted down. Oh, this. We know what this is. This is everything we are. We constructed a society for that. So we don't just not have anywhere to go. We are the Jews who built this place as the last place Jews can go. I have sat in on meetings between Israeli cabinet ministers and left-wing American Jewish organizations. And one time I was privy to an exchange that I just fell madly in love with because it was perfect. I hope I tell it exactly as it was and don't remember it more perfectly than it really was. There's the board of a left-wing American Jewish organization. It's like 7 or 8 years ago. I think J Street, I'm not, maybe it's some other, but similar in politics. And a member of government from Likud. And one of the board members from J Street says, by the way, it's about Gaza. There was some skirmish in Gaza, and the board member from J Street says, and they're talking about settlements, and they say, my fear for Israel is that if Israel isn't a moral country, then it will lose its legitimacy. It will lose its right to exist. I am fighting for Israel when I fight for Israel's morality. And the Israeli government minister said, fuck you. And that was a very deep answer. Both of them were saying deep things. They weren't hearing deep things, but they were saying deep things. What did the American Jew mean? Why does Israel need to be moral to be legitimate or survive? Did you guys come to the Germans and say, hey, if you're not moral, you can't survive, I'm sorry. What does he mean? What's the American Jewish experience?
It means we can't survive.
Folks, liberalism is our redemption. Please understand that ultimately liberalism is the only safe world Jews can live in. We have 140 years of proof. Nowhere else have we ever been as safe or as tolerated or as accepted or as not accepted. Exactly the opposite of accepted. Part. Liberalism is the answer, and there is no other answer. Why would Israel not get that? Why would Israel not be that? What other lesson is there to Jewish history? Is what he was saying. And what was the Israeli saying? What was the Israeli hearing, and what was the Israeli responding? By the way, he was loud. I made it all quiet, dramatic, but he was loud about his. Yes?
Israeli Jews hearing that there will always be a potential reason you might not have a right to exist if you do not live up to certain qualifications in the eyes of the world. He was saying that our right to exist can be questioned because it's intrinsic to who we are, it's intrinsic to these experiences. You can't take these horrific shaping experiences away.
All,
We have to flip up that checklist. It's almost an insult to the memory of the Holocaust.
I think he's saying that the sphere of looking bad is risking, is itself a risk to the Jewish state. Like what the mayor said, we'd rather be alive with a bad reputation than dead and pitied.
yeah.
I think he's saying that we only have ourselves to fight for.
All we are is the Jew who doesn't ask permission. You do not ask permission to live. Because when you do, you're eventually going to find someone who says no. That's all we are. I'm illegitimate if I'm immoral? You started campaigning for the dismantling of America after Vietnam? What does that even mean? Can you imagine a more genocidal statement than I'm illegitimate if I'm immoral? Are humans illegitimate if they misbehave? Does anybody demand of Germany that it stop existing? To an Israeli, can you say something more anti-Semitic? And all I am is the Jew who doesn't depend on whether you think I'm okay. You American Jews. I'm putting a lot into one little fuck you, right? But you American Jews don't understand, I, the Israeli, think, that your situation is contingent on the others thinking you're legitimate. Maybe that's why you're so constantly moralizing about everything. You're always trying to be okay. That is not healthy. That is not freedom. When you stop caring what they think, that's freedom. When you genuinely stop caring what they think, that's freedom. Both of them are right. Neither of them's an idiot. Both of them have 150 years of Jewish history to show. About 60 of it shared. But they absolutely can't talk to each other. Welcome to the other Jews. Welcome to Israelis.